So I'm going to make a start now on the stitch pattern. I'll be starting using the cotton yarn first of all. I recommend starting with the sturdiest of the yarn so that it gives a crisper shape to the edge of the piece that you're crocheting. I'm going to be using a 3.25mm hook. That's a slightly smaller size than I work this on. I work this piece on a 3.5mm hook. The 3.25mm that I'm using today is a D hook, and the 3.5 is also known as an E hook in the US. So I need to work with a multiple of 9. To make a little swatch that size, I'm going to be using just 36 stitches. So I will make 37 chains to start with, to include a turning chain. Now, some people have asked me with the Wefan pattern whether I recommend starting with foundation stitches rather than a traditional foundation chain. So foundation stitches are stitches which you can create without a chain to work into them. Each stitch is linked to the previous one, and I actually don't recommend doing that because the foundation chain is a really good start for the Wefan pattern. It gives a sturdy edge, it makes it a lot firmer, although it is more time consuming to work into. I feel that it does look a little bit better. It is possible to do that though on the first row. However, on subsequent rows you will be working into chains anyway, so I don't think it will make a lot of difference to the overall timing of the project. So the first row is going to be worked all in UK half trebles, which is a half double crochet in the US. And I'm going to be working first of all into the third chain from the hook. And I like to work into the back loop because I want this side, which is a bit smoother, to be visible on the edge, and it will make it a little bit more symmetrical when the other edge is visible. The finished edge will also look like this rather than like the bottom of the chains. So first chain, second chain and third chain from the hook. And then having done that and worked the half treble or half double stitch, I'm then going to work the same stitch into all the other chains along. Just a few more stitches to do and then we'll have completed the first row. So we can see now that this is going to be the first row here. It's fairly smooth and stretchy and it should work perfectly for the stitch pattern that we're creating. So the next stage is to create these longer stitches that rise up higher here. So on the ends we're just using a straightforward, in UK terms, quintuple treble, and for these stitches here you can see that they're doubled and they're joined in the middle, so this stitch is known as the long narrow X stitch. So to work a quintuple treble, that's much easier to recognise in UK terms than in US terms. We can work 5 wraps, and that partners up with 6 chains as the number for the turning chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to work 7 chains across to create the gap here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At this point we're going to skip across a total of 7 chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches, and we're going to work the long narrow X stitch into the 8th stitch. So to work the long narrow X stitch, again I need 5 wraps, and try to have them evenly spaced on the hook so that they you'll get a more even stitch. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and going into the 8th stitch. Then to work the long narrow X stitch, I've pulled up a loop and I'm going to pull 2 loops off 3 times, 2 and 3. I'm going to wrap twice more and put it in the next stitch, pull up a loop and pull 2 loops off 6 times, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, wrap twice again, and then look for the 2 loops that are more prominent in the center here. Slide underneath them and pull up a loop there, and then remove 2 loops 3 times, 2 and 3, and that's the long narrow X stitch. So this is a stitch that this pattern is mostly based on. So I'm going to carry on working 7 chains, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5 wraps. Make sure they're fairly evenly spaced. Count 7 stitches from the last, so that's my last stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and work into the next stitch. Pull through 2 loops 3 times, 2, 3, wrap twice, into the next stitch, pull off 2 loops 6 times, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And at this point my yarn is stuck again. Ah, another knot. Pull through. Oops. So now I haven't finished that stitch. We needed to wrap twice more. Go through the prominent center loops. Pull up another yarn loop and pull through 2 loops 3 more times. And there we've got another of the long narrow X stitches. So you can see how this is building up as the brown section in there. And again, the repeat is 7 chains. And 5 wraps to make the long narrow X stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Skip 7 stitches and pull through 2 loops 3 times, wrap twice into the next stitch, pull up a loop and pull through 2 loops 6 times, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, wrap twice more. Look for those prominent 2 loops and pull through 2 loops 3 final times. And now again we're going to work through 7 chains. And now we're going to work a quintuple treble in UK terms or a quadruple treble in US terms. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wraps, and then into the top of that stitch there, and just pull through those loops, a total of 6 times, 2 loops at a time. And so that completes this section. We're now on the right side here. This piece I've laid out as the wrong side. So that's the right side here. I think I turned it over at the start. And you can see there's not a huge amount of difference. The stitches are a bit smoother on the right hand side. You can see these little V-shaped sections of the stitch. When you turn it over, the stitch looks a little bit more bumpy and bobbly. It's a more textured side. So it would be absolutely fine if you wanted to use it for a scarf or a shawl, or something that might turn around and you would see the other side. But what you want to do is make sure that you keep each piece facing the same way. It will probably look slightly odd if you had this piece with the smooth side facing, and one of the other colours you'd switched it round and had the bumpy side facing, because the pieces wouldn't look the same. And you can see that I've got a top row here on this piece, and that's very simply worked using UK double crochet, which is US single crochet, into each of the stitches, and we'll be doing that into the front loop of the stitches. So I'm working a turning chain here so that I don't pull the first stitch tight, and I'll be working, instead of working right through the head of the stitch or the chain, I'll simply be working through the nearest loop. So that's my double crochet there, and I'll be doing that to each of the chains and each of the stitches in this row. So I need to work into 2 more chains, and then also the turning chain. Oops, that's better. So the turning chain here counts as a stitch too. And so there you can see I have got my turning chain worked into on both ends. I've got all the chains worked into, and I've got all of the long narrow X stitches. And at this point the long narrow X stitches tend to close up a little bit more and look like a double bar, so the whole thing has the effect of a ladder. And this is where I can actually leave those stitches. Again, we're on the wrong side here. You'll see later it's important to note the right side of the work when you're interlacing the pieces so that they match up on both sides, not just for the aesthetic effect I mentioned earlier, but also so that you are working in the same direction on each of the pieces as mentioned in the written stitch pattern.